It was a crisp autumn morning in the quiet town of Maplewood, where the golden leaves danced lazily in the breeze, and the small community bustled with its usual charm. Life here seemed predictable, with friendly neighbors, weekend bake sales, and the comforting hum of routine. But on this particular day, something happened that would shatter the town's tranquil surface and spark conversations far beyond its borders. At Maplewood High, the day began like any other. Students gathered in the hallways, their laughter echoing through the building as they exchanged stories about weekend plans and upcoming exams. Among them was Ethan, a 16-year-old student with Down syndrome, known for his bright smile and love for painting. Ethan was a familiar face in the school, often seen with his sketchbook in hand, creating vivid illustrations that revealed his unique perspective on the world. Despite his kind-hearted nature, Ethan had always been treated differently, not just by some of his peers but, more disturbingly, by certain adults who were meant to support him. Ethan had grown used to the stares, the whispers, and even the occasional snide remark. His mother, Lisa, had always taught him to hold his head high and focus on his passions, assuring him that his value wasn't defined by others' opinions. But no amount of preparation could have shielded Ethan from what unfolded that morning. The incident occurred during a routine group activity in social studies class. The teacher, Ms. Harper, was a seasoned educator, known for her no-nonsense attitude and strict classroom rules. While many respected her authority, there was an undercurrent of tension in her interactions with Ethan. She often seemed impatient with his pace and dismissive of his contributions, but until now, her actions had largely gone unnoticed or unchallenged. As the class worked on a group discussion about community service, Ethan eagerly raised his hand to share his idea, a school-wide art project to beautify the local park. Art was his sanctuary, and he was excited to use it as a way to bring people together. But before he could finish his sentence, Ms. Harper interrupted him sharply. "Ethan, this isn't a time for your little drawings," she said, her tone laced with irritation. "We're talking about real ideas that can actually make a difference." The room fell silent. The other students exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to intervene or look away. Ethan's face flushed, his excitement replaced by confusion and hurt. But Ms. Harper wasn't done. She turned to the rest of the class and, with an exasperated sigh, said, "This is why it's so difficult to include everyone in these discussions." It was a moment that felt like it stretched on forever. Ethan's hand slowly dropped to his side, and he stared at the desk, his sketchbook untouched. Some students looked outraged, while others seemed frozen, unsure how to react. Finally, one of Ethan's classmates, Mia, mustered the courage to speak up. "That's not fair," Mia said, her voice trembling but firm. "Ethan's ideas matter just as much as anyone else's." Ms. Harper's expression darkened. "Mia, this isn't about fairness. It's about staying on task. Let's move on." But the damage was done. Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Without a word, he grabbed his belongings and walked out of the classroom. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the soft sound of the door closing behind him. Outside, Ethan sat on the steps of the school, staring at the horizon. His chest felt tight, his mind racing with a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief. He had always known that some people saw him as different, but hearing it stated so blatantly, in front of his peers, was a blow he hadn't expected. He wondered if his love for art and his dreams of making a difference were truly insignificant, as Ms. Harper had implied. Meanwhile, inside the classroom, a storm was brewing. Mia and a few other students whispered among themselves, their frustration evident. Word of the incident spread quickly, reaching other classes and even the teacher's lounge. By lunchtime, the story had traveled beyond the school walls, sparking outrage among parents and community members who began to question the school's commitment to inclusivity. Unbeknownst to Ethan, his quiet act of leaving the classroom would soon become a catalyst for something much larger. That single moment, Ms. Harper's words, Ethan's hurt, and Mia's defiance, had set the stage for a confrontation that would force the entire town to confront its values, its prejudices, and its responsibilities to those who were often overlooked. Ethan didn't know it yet, but his story was about to become the spark for a movement that would challenge not only his school but also the community itself. And as he sat there, the crisp autumn breeze ruffling the pages of his sketchbook, he began to sketch. Each stroke of his pencil was a small act of resistance, a way to reclaim his voice and remind himself, and the world, that he had something valuable to offer. Ethan's walk home that day was unusually quiet. The usual rhythm of Maplewood's small-town charm, the chirping of birds, the distant hum of traffic, the cheerful greetings of neighbors, seemed muted, almost as if the world had tilted slightly off balance. Ethan clutched his sketchbook tightly to his chest, his mind replaying the moment in class like a film on an endless loop. Every word Ms. Harper had said echoed in his ears, each one cutting deeper than the last. When he reached home, his mother, Lisa, immediately sensed that something was wrong. She had always been attuned to Ethan's emotions, a skill honed from years of advocating for him in a world that often struggled to see his brilliance. Ethan sat down at the kitchen table, his usual chatter replaced by an uncharacteristic silence. "Ethan, honey, what happened?" Lisa asked gently as she placed a glass of juice in front of him. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure if he wanted to relive the humiliation. But then he opened his sketchbook and began to draw. With quick, deliberate strokes, he sketched the scene from class, himself standing with his hand raised, Ms. Harper glaring down at him, and his classmates watching in stunned silence. When he finished, he pushed the sketchbook toward Lisa, unable to meet her eyes. Lisa stared at the drawing, her heart sinking as she pieced together the story. Her mind raced with a mixture of emotions, anger at Ms. Harper, sorrow for Ethan, and a fierce determination to protect her son. She had fought too hard for Ethan's right to an equal education to let this go unchallenged. "That's not okay," Lisa said firmly, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "No one has the right to make you feel this way, Ethan. We're going to do something about it." But Ethan wasn't sure what doing something would look like. He had always tried to avoid conflict, preferring the solace of his art to the unpredictability of confrontation. He wasn't sure he wanted the attention that might come with speaking out. The next day, Lisa decided to visit the school. She requested a meeting with the principal, Mr. Daniels, to discuss the incident. Mr. Daniels was a well-meaning but often indecisive man, more concerned with maintaining the school's reputation than addressing deeper issues. When Lisa recounted Ethan's experience, Mr. Daniels nodded sympathetically but seemed hesitant to take decisive action. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Walker," he said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "But Ms. Harper is a respected teacher, and I'm sure this was just a misunderstanding. Perhaps Ethan misinterpreted her intentions?" Lisa's frustration bubbled to the surface. "Misinterpreted," she repeated, her voice rising. "My son was publicly humiliated for trying to participate in class. How is that a misunderstanding? This isn't just about Ms. Harper's words, it's about the culture of this school. Ethan deserves to feel valued and respected, just like every other student here." Mr. Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I'll look into the matter," he said finally. "But these things take time." Lisa left the meeting feeling disheartened but not defeated. She knew that waiting for the school to act would likely lead to more delays and excuses. If change was going to happen, she would have to make it happen herself. Meanwhile, the story of what had happened to Ethan continued to spread through the community. At first, it was just a topic of hushed conversations among parents at the local coffee shop or murmured discussions at the grocery store. But soon, the whispers turned into louder voices. Social media posts began to appear, with students and parents sharing their outrage and calling for accountability. One post in particular, written by Mia, the classmate who had defended Ethan, gained significant attention. She recounted the incident in detail, describing how Ethan's voice had been silenced and how it had made her question the values her school claimed to uphold. "If we can't stand up for someone like Ethan," Mia wrote, "what does that say about us as a community?" The post went viral within the town, sparking hundreds of comments. Some praised Mia's courage and echoed her call for change. Others, however, were more dismissive, arguing that Ms. Harper had simply been trying to manage her classroom and that the situation was being blown out of proportion. Lisa knew that the growing attention could be a double-edged sword. While she was grateful for the support, she worried about how it might affect Ethan, who was already struggling to process what had happened. But Ethan surprised her. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Ethan handed Lisa his sketchbook. Inside were new drawings, each one more powerful than the last. There were depictions of himself standing tall despite the stares of others, of a community rallying together, and of a mural that seemed to radiate hope and unity. "These are amazing, Ethan," Lisa said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have such a gift." Ethan hesitated before speaking. "Do you think people will listen?" he asked softly. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think they will," she said. "And even if they don't, we'll make them listen." Inspired by Ethan's art, Lisa decided to organize a community meeting to address the broader issues of inclusion and respect. She reached out to other parents, teachers, and even local businesses, inviting them to come together and discuss how Maplewood could become a more inclusive place for everyone. The response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life expressed their interest in attending, from parents of special needs children to community leaders who saw an opportunity to make a lasting impact. Even Megan Porter, a local journalist known for her investigative reporting, reached out to Lisa, expressing her desire to cover the story. As the date of the meeting approached, Lisa felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger journey, but she also knew that every journey began with a single step. And as she watched Ethan work on a new drawing, this one of a blank canvas being filled with vibrant colors, she felt a renewed sense of hope. The quiet town of Maplewood was about to have a much-needed conversation, one that would challenge its values and force it to confront the ways it had failed its most vulnerable members. And at the heart of it all was Ethan, a boy with a sketchbook and a dream, reminding everyone that even the smallest voices could create the loudest echoes. The days leading up to the community meeting buzzed with a sense of anticipation that was almost palpable. The story of Ethan and the incident with Ms. Harper had spread like wildfire, reaching not only Maplewood residents, but also neighboring towns. What started as a small classroom altercation had turned into a lightning rod for a much larger conversation about inclusion, respect, and the responsibility of institutions to nurture every student's potential. Ethan, however, remained a reluctant protagonist. He continued to pour his emotions into his art, creating pieces that reflected both his pain and his hope for a better future. His mother, Lisa, marveled at the depth and maturity in his work. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table sketching yet another powerful scene, a classroom where every student was a different color and shape, but all were smiling and working together, Lisa felt a wave of pride and determination. "This is the message the world needs to see," she said softly, sitting beside him. "Ethan, your art is more than just drawings. It's a way to show people what inclusion really means." Ethan nodded but didn't respond, focusing instead on perfecting the details in his sketch. Lisa knew he was still processing everything, but she could see a quiet resolve building within him. The night of the meeting arrived, and the community center was packed to capacity. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the room, filled with parents, teachers, students, and concerned citizens. At the front of the room was a long table where Lisa, Ethan, and a few other speakers sat. Megan Porter, the journalist, stood off to the side, her notebook in hand and her expression focused. She had been following the story closely, conducting interviews and gathering information that hinted at a larger issue within the school's culture. The meeting began with a few introductory remarks from Lisa. Her voice was steady but impassioned as she recounted what had happened to Ethan and the broader implications for other students who might feel excluded or undervalued. She didn't dwell on anger or blame, instead, she emphasized the need for change and the opportunity to make Maplewood a model of inclusivity. "Every child deserves to feel seen, heard, and respected," Lisa said, her voice rising slightly. "This isn't just about Ethan. It's about every student who has ever felt like they didn't belong. And it's about us, as a community, deciding what kind of message we want to send to the next generation." The room erupted into applause, but the tension was still thick. When Lisa gestured for Ethan to speak, the room fell silent. Ethan stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he held one of his sketches. He looked out at the sea of faces, many of them familiar, and took a deep breath. "I just want to be like everyone else," he began, his voice quiet but clear. "I want to share my ideas and be part of things. I don't understand why that's so hard." He held up the sketch he had been working on, a vibrant, hopeful image of a community mural where people of all ages, races, and abilities were painting together. "This is what I see when I think about my town," Ethan said, his voice gaining strength. "I think we can be like this. But we have to try." There was a moment of silence before the audience broke into applause, some even rising to their feet. Lisa reached over to squeeze Ethan's hand, tears in her eyes. But the meeting wasn't without its challenges. As the floor was opened for discussion, several voices expressed skepticism or frustration. One teacher defended Ms. Harper, insisting that her intentions had been misunderstood and that managing a classroom was a difficult task. Another parent voiced concerns about the resources required to accommodate students with special needs, questioning whether it was fair to disrupt the education of others. Mia, Ethan's classmate, stood up to respond. "I don't think including someone like Ethan is a disruption," she said firmly. "I think it makes our school better. We're supposed to be learning how to work together, not just how to pass tests. If we can't include everyone, then we're failing as a school." Her words resonated with many in the room, sparking a wave of supportive comments. Megan Porter took notes furiously, sensing the raw emotion and complexity of the discussion. She had uncovered troubling details during her investigation, including a series of internal memos suggesting that the school had repeatedly failed to address concerns raised by parents of special needs students. As the meeting continued, Lisa presented a set of concrete proposals for the school to adopt, including mandatory sensitivity training for staff, the creation of an inclusion task force, and the implementation of art and peer mentorship programs to foster understanding among students. The principal, Mr. Daniels, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room, finally stood to speak. His face was pale, and he seemed visibly uncomfortable under the weight of the scrutiny. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight and for sharing your thoughts," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "I'll admit, as principal, it's clear to me that we've fallen short in some areas. But I want to assure you that we're committed to making things right. We'll review the proposals and begin taking steps toward creating a more inclusive environment." The crowd's response was mixed. Some applauded his acknowledgement, while others remained skeptical, their arms crossed and their expressions guarded. It was clear that words alone wouldn't be enough, the community wanted action. As the meeting drew to a close, Lisa looked at Ethan and smiled. While there was still a long road ahead, tonight had been a victory, a moment when Ethan's voice had been heard, not just by a few but by an entire community. That night, as they walked home under the glow of the streetlights, Ethan turned to his mother and said, "Do you think things will really change?" Lisa thought for a moment before replying. "Change doesn't happen overnight, Ethan. But tonight, we planted a seed. And with enough care, it can grow into something amazing." In the days that followed, Ethan's sketch of the community mural began to take on a life of its own. Inspired by his vision, local artists and volunteers came together to bring it to reality, painting it on the side of the school as a symbol of unity and hope. It was just the beginning, but for Ethan and the town of Maplewood, it was proof that even the smallest voices could create the loudest echoes. The months following the community meeting were filled with a series of challenges and triumphs, each one pushing Maplewood to rethink its understanding of inclusivity and empathy. The mural that Ethan had envisioned began to take shape on the side of the school, its vibrant colors depicting students of all abilities and backgrounds working together. The imagery was powerful, a reminder that unity was built on mutual respect and understanding. Yet, as the mural neared completion, tension simmered beneath the surface. Some of the school's faculty remained reluctant to fully embrace the changes, and a small but vocal group of parents still questioned whether the push for inclusivity was too much. In the weeks after the mural was painted, the town had begun to rally around the idea of supporting students like Ethan, and a ripple effect spread beyond the school's walls. Businesses had volunteered their time and resources to sponsor art programs for students with disabilities. Local newspapers ran articles about Ethan's journey, highlighting the courage of his mother, Lisa, and the community that had come together in the wake of a single classroom incident. Maplewood had become a case study in how one person's story could spark change, but as the excitement grew, so did the pressure. Ethan, for his part, continued to navigate the new attention with a quiet sense of dignity. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and while he was proud of the mural, he still struggled with the idea of being celebrated for something that had come from his pain. He had always preferred the safety of his sketchbook, where the world could be controlled by his hands and his imagination. But as the mural became a symbol of change, the spotlight was unavoidable. One afternoon, Lisa took Ethan to the site of the mural to see the final touches being made. The last strokes of paint were being applied, and local children were there, watching as the once blank wall transformed into a beacon of hope. Ethan stood at a distance, hesitant to approach the growing crowd. "You know," Lisa said gently, noticing Ethan's discomfort, "this mural is something special. It's not just about your art, it's about your story. It's about the way you changed all of us." Ethan looked up at her, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't change anything, Mom. I just drew what I felt." Lisa smiled, putting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly it, Ethan. You just had the courage to express what needed to be said. And that's something most people can't do." As they stood together, watching the mural come to life, Lisa felt a deep sense of pride in her son. She had always known that Ethan had something extraordinary within him, but seeing the tangible impact of his actions, a mural that would live on for generations, filled her with a profound sense of awe. But for Ethan, the mural represented more than just a victory. It had become a symbol of the burden of expectation. People no longer saw him simply as Ethan, the quiet, artistic teenager, but as Ethan, the boy who had sparked a movement. Everywhere he went, people asked about the mural, praised his bravery, and wondered how they could help further the cause of inclusivity. While he appreciated the support, it was overwhelming. He didn't know how to answer the questions, or live up to the expectations. One evening, as Ethan sat in his room, sketching in the dim light, Lisa came in to check on him. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes and the tension in his posture. "You're carrying a lot on your shoulders, aren't you?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded without looking up from his sketchbook. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want everyone to notice me." Lisa sat down next to him. "I know, sweetheart. But sometimes, change comes whether we ask for it or not. And you're making a real difference. You're teaching people that we all have something valuable to offer, no matter who we are or where we come from." Ethan sighed, closing the sketchbook and looking at his mother. "But what if I can't keep up? What if I let everyone down?" Lisa smiled warmly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You won't let anyone down, Ethan. You've already shown us what real courage is. And you don't have to carry this weight alone. We're all in this together." The following weeks were filled with workshops and discussions at the school, aimed at fostering a more inclusive environment. Teachers and staff attended sensitivity training, and students participated in group projects designed to break down barriers and celebrate differences. But not all the changes were easy. Some teachers resisted the new approach, claiming that it disrupted their teaching methods or took away from their focus on standardized testing. A few parents, still skeptical, pulled their children from the programs, worried about the potential distractions. Yet for every challenge that arose, there were moments of triumph. Mia, who had become one of Ethan's closest allies, took the lead in organizing a school-wide art exhibition to showcase the work of students with disabilities. The event was a massive success, attracting attention from local news outlets and even the mayor, who praised the initiative as a model for other schools. Ethan's artwork, once relegated to the confines of his sketchbook, was now displayed for all to see, earning admiration and respect from people who had never truly understood his talents before. Despite the progress, however, there was still much work to be done. The path toward true inclusivity was not a straight line, and there were moments when it felt as though the town was taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But Lisa remained steadfast in her belief that change was possible, and that small actions could lead to significant shifts in perspective. One evening, Lisa sat down with Ethan after a particularly exhausting day. He had just finished another round of interviews with reporters who wanted to know his thoughts on the mural and the growing movement. His answers had been polite, but Lisa could tell that the weight of it all was beginning to wear on him. "You've come so far, Ethan," Lisa said softly, her voice filled with pride. "You've shown people that even when the world doesn't seem fair, you can still make a difference. And that's something not everyone gets to do." Ethan looked up at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I never meant to change everything. I just wanted to show people what I could do." Lisa nodded. "And that's exactly what you've done." As the days passed, Ethan's sense of self began to shift. He realized that the changes happening in Maplewood were not just for him, but for everyone. The mural, the workshops, the conversations, it was all part of a larger movement that was rewriting the story of his town. And while the journey had been difficult, he knew that he was not alone in it. The road ahead might still be uncertain, but the foundation had been laid. And for the first time, Ethan felt a sense of peace, knowing that his voice, his art, had made a lasting impact on the world around him. As the weeks turned into months, the transformation that Ethan had sparked began to take root not only in Maplewood but in the broader region. The changes were subtle yet powerful. New initiatives were introduced at the school, and discussions around inclusivity became a regular part of the curriculum. Teachers, once resistant to the idea, began to see the value in fostering a more accepting environment, one where students with different abilities were no longer marginalized but celebrated. The once quiet halls of Maplewood High, where students with special needs had often felt invisible, now echoed with the voices of those who had long been overlooked. The mural, which had started as a simple act of artistic expression, became the centerpiece of this transformation. It stood proudly on the side of the school, a permanent reminder that change was possible when a community came together to support one another. The mural wasn't just a work of art, it was a symbol of the resilience and courage of all the students, teachers, and parents who had worked tirelessly to make it a reality. For Ethan, it was both humbling and overwhelming. He still wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention, but he couldn't deny that the mural had become a focal point of hope for so many. It was his legacy, one that would live on long after he graduated. Yet, even with all the progress, the road ahead was still uncertain. There were moments when Ethan questioned whether the changes would last, whether they would be enough to truly shift the culture of the school. His doubts grew as he saw the slow pace of systemic change, how policies, no matter how well-intentioned, often took years to be fully implemented. But these thoughts were often tempered by the stories he heard from his peers, stories of students who felt seen for the first time, who no longer feared being ridiculed or ignored. And there was Mia, who had become his closest friend and ally. She had always been outspoken about the need for inclusivity, but now, with Ethan's leadership, she felt more empowered than ever to continue the fight. One afternoon, after school had let out, Ethan and Mia sat together on the steps of the school, their backpacks resting beside them. The air was crisp, the golden light of autumn casting a warm glow on the school's brick walls. Ethan looked over at the mural, his gaze lingering on the image of a young boy with Down syndrome, smiling as he painted alongside his classmates. It was a reflection of Ethan himself, someone who had once been unsure of his place, but had found a way to make his mark on the world. "Mia," Ethan said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "do you think it's really changing anything? I mean, will people remember this, remember us?" Mia looked over at him, her expression thoughtful. "Of course, they will," she said with conviction. "You've made a difference, Ethan. People will remember you for showing them that there's so much more to us than what they see on the surface." Ethan nodded slowly, still unsure. "But sometimes I wonder if it's enough. What if this isn't enough to make things change for everyone who's struggling?" Mia leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "It's never going to be easy. Change is messy, and it takes time. But you've already started something. And that's huge. You've given people a reason to believe in something better. Ethan couldn't help but smile, his doubts easing slightly in the face of Mia's unwavering support. She had been with him through it all, since the moment he stood up to Ms. Harper, since the mural was painted, and even now, as they navigated the uncertain waters of change. He realized that the impact of what he had started wasn't just about the mural or the speeches or the media attention, it was about the people who had been touched by his story. It was about the ripple effect that had begun in Maplewood and was slowly making its way across the world. As the school year went on, Ethan became more involved in the new initiatives that were being launched. He worked alongside teachers to create art workshops for students with disabilities, helping to organize community events that encouraged dialogue about inclusivity and empathy. His art became a tool for communication, a way for others to express their feelings and experiences. Ethan had found a way to channel his own struggles into something that empowered others. The boy who had once been ashamed of his differences was now a voice for those who had long been silenced. Despite the successes, the journey was far from easy. Ethan faced moments of self-doubt and frustration, especially when he encountered resistance from those who still clung to outdated views about disability and inclusion. There were people who simply couldn't understand why things needed to change, who saw his efforts as unnecessary or even disruptive. But with every challenge, Ethan grew stronger, more determined to continue pushing for progress. One evening, as he sat in his room, working on a new sketch, he received a call from his mother. "Ethan, there's someone here to see you. A reporter from the local news station wants to interview you about the mural and the work you've been doing." At first, Ethan felt a surge of anxiety. Another interview? Another chance to speak publicly? He wasn't sure he was ready for it. But then he remembered Mia's words, how far he had come, how much he had already accomplished. He put down his pencil and stood up. "Okay, I'll do it." When the reporter arrived, Ethan found himself in front of the camera once again. This time, however, he felt different. The words came easier, his confidence growing as he spoke about the changes in Maplewood and the importance of making everyone feel valued. "It's not about being perfect," he said, his voice steady. "It's about trying. It's about listening to people's stories and understanding what they go through. And then, making the decision to do something about it." The interview aired the next evening, and within hours, calls flooded in from other communities, asking how they could implement similar changes in their own schools. Ethan had become a symbol of hope for countless others, proof that one person's voice, one person's story, could change the course of an entire community. As the years passed and Ethan graduated from Maplewood High, the changes that had begun there rippled outward, touching the lives of students, teachers, and families across the region. The mural remained a permanent fixture, a living testament to the power of inclusion and the impact of a single, quiet act of courage. Ethan's legacy was not just in the mural or the programs that followed, it was in the hearts of the people whose lives had been touched by his story. And as he walked away from his high school days, ready to embrace whatever came next, he knew that the change he had started wasn't just about him. It was about all of them. Every student, every teacher, every person who had ever felt like they didn't belong. Together, they had built something that would last far longer than any one individual. As Ethan stepped into the next chapter of his life, he carried with him not just the memory of his high school years, but the lessons learned and the relationships built. Graduation day arrived, a bittersweet moment that felt both like an end and a beginning. The school gym was filled with the chatter and excitement of students preparing to walk across the stage, receive their diplomas, and move on to the next phase of their lives. Yet, for Ethan, it wasn't just about receiving a diploma, it was about everything that had led to this moment, all the struggles and triumphs that had shaped him into the young man he was becoming. The journey from that first moment in the classroom, when he had been humiliated and shamed for his differences, to this moment of recognition and respect had been long and challenging. There had been days when it felt like nothing would change, when he felt overwhelmed by the weight of expectations. There had been times when his desire for solitude, for simply blending into the background, had clashed with the growing demands of his newfound role as a leader for inclusion. But as he stood in his cap and gown, surrounded by friends, family, and teachers who had supported him through thick and thin, he realized just how far he had come. His mother, Lisa, sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. She had been his rock, his constant source of encouragement, even when he had wanted to give up. She had seen the potential in him long before anyone else did, and now, as she watched her son stand tall among his peers, she knew that everything they had fought for had been worth it. Ethan had not only proven to himself what he was capable of, but he had also shown the world that disability did not define a person's worth or their ability to create change. The ceremony was a whirlwind of applause, speeches, and moments of celebration, but for Ethan, it felt surreal. As he walked across the stage to collect his diploma, he couldn't help but glance over at the mural that had become the heart of the school's transformation. The mural, which had once been just a piece of art, had now become a symbol of all that had been achieved, a reminder of the courage it had taken to challenge the status quo and push for something better. The mural had changed not just the school, but the entire community. It had sparked conversations about disability, inclusivity, and empathy that hadn't existed before. And Ethan had been at the center of it all. In the months that followed, Ethan found himself facing new challenges. He had been accepted into a prestigious art school, a dream he had always held close, but the transition was difficult. For the first time in years, he was no longer surrounded by the familiar faces of Maplewood High. He was in a new environment, with new people who didn't know his story, who didn't know the boy who had stood up for his right to be seen. He found himself questioning his place once again. Would the changes he had worked so hard for be lost in the larger world? Would people still see him as the boy who had changed his town, or would he become just another student in a sea of faces? But then, one day, as he was sketching in a quiet corner of the campus, he was approached by a fellow student. She introduced herself as Sarah, a freshman who had recently transferred from a school where she had been bullied for her own differences. She had heard about Ethan's story from a professor who had mentioned the mural and the work he had done in Maplewood. "I just wanted to say thank you," Sarah said shyly. "You don't know me, but your story really helped me. I came here thinking I'd never fit in, but knowing that someone else has gone through something like I did, it made me believe that maybe I can be okay here too." Ethan's heart swelled with emotion as he looked at Sarah, her vulnerability and strength reminding him of his own journey. In that moment, he realized that the impact of what he had done was far from over. It wasn't about the mural or the media attention, it was about the people whose lives he had touched along the way. It was about the ripple effect that had started in Maplewood but was now reaching far beyond its borders. As he continued his studies at the art school, Ethan became more involved in initiatives for students with disabilities, advocating for better representation and support in the arts. He was invited to speak at conferences, share his story, and encourage other students to use their voices and talents to create change. The fear he had once felt about stepping into the spotlight had gradually transformed into a sense of purpose. He wasn't just an artist anymore. He was a voice for inclusion, a reminder that art had the power to transcend barriers and unite people in ways that words alone could not. Over the years, Ethan's journey continued to inspire those around him. He returned to Maplewood several times, not as a hero or a figurehead, but as a friend and ally to the students who were now walking the same path he had once walked. He visited classrooms, spoke with teachers, and shared his experiences with the next generation of students who were learning about the importance of inclusivity. The mural that had started it all remained a permanent fixture, a testament to the community's commitment to change. It wasn't just a painting on a wall, it was a living, breathing symbol of the progress that had been made and the work that still needed to be done. In the end, Ethan's legacy was not just in the changes that had taken place in his town or the recognition he had received, it was in the countless lives he had touched, the students who had found their voices because of his courage, and the communities that had been inspired by his story. Ethan had shown that one person's actions could spark a movement, that a single act of courage could create a ripple effect that would continue to change the world for years to come. And as he looked back on his journey, Ethan knew that the most important change had not been in the mural or the programs he had helped create, it had been in himself, in the realization that he had the power to shape his own story and, in doing so, inspire others to do the same,